Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Brecker. I'm an engineer with the City of Austin Watershed Protection Department. And today I'll be presenting on the Annie Street Flood Risk Reduction Project. We recently finished the preliminary engineering phase of this project and just started the design phase. And we'd like to give the residents in the area an update on this project. So today I'll be presenting on some flooding background, storm drain system concepts, and capital improvement project CIP process. Then we'll go over the results from the preliminary engineering report, walk us through a couple of the alternatives looked at in depth during that phase, and then look at the estimated schedule and provide some information resources for flooding info, as well as project updates. So the two types of flooding we see in the city of Austin are creek flooding, and this occurs when a creek rises over its banks. This occurs around creeks, streams, or ditches. Then we have localized flooding, occurs away from creeks, and this is mainly due to an inadequate storm drain system. When the rainfall hits the street, a system is supposed to convey that water away from the street and into a creek or pond. If the system is inadequate, then it results in ponding, which results in flooding, and that's the case we have for Annie Street. So citywide, we have over 6,600 total complaints. You can see the complaints there on that map. The red dots are building complaints. That's where water has entered the garage or the house. Yard complaints in yellow, where water has entered the yard, or street complaints where water is ponded in the street. We see a majority of these in neighborhoods built before the 1980s. They tend to have more drainage problems before our certain code and specifications were put into place. And we find that, there's really usually no quick or easy solution. Usually requires a CIP project, which requires a lot of time and a lot of money. You can see the call out there for the project location. That is the Annie Street location, and we'll zoom in on that. The purple boundary is the Annie Street project area. There's 13 building flooding complaints in this area, 3 yard flooding complaints, and 1 street flooding complaint. The black dashed line is the existing infrastructure for the Annie Street area. It's undersized storm drain system for the storm events we experience in this area, and some of it is built as early as 1930s. So we've determined the main cause of flooding for this area to be an inadequate storm drain system. So what is a storm drain system? Picture 1 shows a curb inlet, which I'm sure you've seen. When the rainwater hits the street or the sidewalk, it's sloped to convey it to these inlets, which will then convey it to an underground set of pipes shown in picture 2. The underground set of pipes then convey it to an outfall into a creek, or sometimes a water quality or detention pond. In our case with Annie Street, it conveys it into an outfall into East Bolton Creek. As I mentioned, the solution to these problems, updating the storm drain infrastructure, usually takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and that's usually a capital improvement project. So I'm going to walk us through the different phases of the CIP project process. We start with at Watershed, we start with the complaint data that I went over earlier. We identify problem areas within the city, and then we will do a internal feasibility study on those areas, determine if there's a feasible solution to that problem. If we deem there is, then we will move it to the preliminary engineering phase. From there, we look at existing modeling and come up with multiple alternatives, and then we will recommend the most feasible alternative going forward into design, which we are currently with the Annie Street project. In the design phase, we take that recommended alternative from the preliminary engineering phase, and we look at it in detail. We break it down and we create a design plan set that we will then award to a contractor in the permitting and bidding phase, and then the contractor will then perform the last phase of this process, which is construction. So before I go over the 2 alternatives that we looked at in depth during the PER phase, I want to go over some of the ways we come up with these alternatives during the PER phase. We collect data for the area, and that includes historical rainfall, ground elevations, how the water flows in this area, and then look at complaint data, high flood water marks, like the picture shown there. We take that information and we can model the existing conditions of this area. We know how much water is going there, how high the water gets. And from that information, we develop alternatives. We know where the water is going, so we know where the pipe should go. And we can put in various alignments and see the different results it has. We know how much water is going there, so we know how big the pipe should be. Another aspect we look at in modeling is showing no adverse flooding impacts. So we want to create a solution to this area, but we want to ensure we're not causing flooding issues downstream. And when we look at that, we ensure that there's no adverse flooding impact downstream of our area. So alternative 1 was looked at in depth during the PER phase. Right now on the map is the existing infrastructure in the black dashed line. And then there's a red line, and that is the recently constructed Mary Street relief line that was put in place last summer, and it was put in place to reduce it was put in place as an emergency to reduce the risk of flooding for the area until this Annie Street project could be designed and constructed. Now, all these alternatives are designed to work in conjunction with the Mary Street relief line. So alternative 1 was not a recommended alternative, but I'm going to walk us through some of the components of it from the bottom of the page up. The Crockett Street received a new storm drain system and outfall. There was flow added to the existing system along Johanna Street, and then there was flow diverted between Mary, Annie, and Milton Street. The line between Annie and Mary Street, this line is along our easement, but runs through private property and has had repair issues in the past. So this alternative abandons that storm drain, and which ultimately takes it out of commission. It no longer receives flow. As I mentioned before about adverse impact, when that was looked at during this alternative, when that modeling was looked at, it was determined that we needed to modify the East Bolden Creek channel, and that included 2,200 linear feet of channel modifications. When this was determined, this was looked at and discussed internally with Watershed, and ultimately this alternative was not recommended due to those channel modifications. So moving on to alternative 4, and I do want to mention alternative 2 and 3 real quickly. Alternative 2 also had adverse flooding impacts like alternative 1, also required channel modifications. Alternative 3 is similar to alternative 4, but is larger storm drain pipes, which conflicted with the existing utilities in the area. So going forward with alternative 4, it is the recommended alternative. The proposed storm drain is in gold, and I'm going to describe it from the bottom of the page up. So we have new storm drain along Eva, Newton, feeding into a line along Crockett Street that feeds into a Wilson Street line, into a upsized Johanna Street line. And then we have new line along Johanna Street, upsized line along Newton and Mary, and some new line along Annie Street into an upsized outfall along Annie Street. We are still abandoning the storm drain line between Annie and Mary Street. And with the provided benefit of the reduced risk of flooding for the area, with the abandonment of that storm drain line that will no longer receive flow, and with no channel modifications for alternative 4. Alternative 4 was the recommended alternative going forward into design. So let's look at this alternative a little closer. The total estimated cost is $8.5 million. Some of the main components include 6,400 feet of storm drain pipe, 34 storm drain inlets, upsized storm drain outfalls on Annie and Johanna Street. The benefits are it provides street conveyance of storm water that meets current code requirements. It also abandons that storm drain between Mary and Annie Street. So let's look at the estimated schedule. As I mentioned, we just finished the PER phase. We are just starting design, and we anticipate design and permitting to run from now until spring of 2024. whereas we anticipate construction to begin soon after in 2024. Any updates to that schedule? Any updates on this project? If you'd like to read the preliminary engineering report, that can be found at austintexas.gov/AndyStreet. I also wanted to mention some available resources. We encourage everyone to consider purchasing flood insurance. If you would like to report any flooding or drainage concerns, please report that to 311. They also have an app as well. We encourage everyone to avoid building in drainage easements or the floodplain. And for any information for flood proofing, you can email floodpro@austintexas.gov. And for any additional resources, atxfloodsafety.com. That concludes my presentation for today. Once again, my name is Jason Brecker. I'm the project sponsor for the Andy Street Flood Risk Reduction Project. My contact information is there. If you'd like to reach out if you have any comments or questions, please reach out to me or Jennifer Simmons, the project manager. Her contact information is there as well. I thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.